Okay, hi, Reverend
Hello.
Joy. This is our first time actually seeing each other's face.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's good to
It's
see you.
it's nice to see you too. I hear your name. I say your name often too, as you know. I ended up naming my daughter, yeah, not after you, but same name.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah. So, how are you?
I'm doing really fine. I've been thinking about my time in Tucson, and I realize it's been almost a decade since I left, 9.5 years. And since then, I've served 6 more years as an interim minister in 4 different congregations. And then 3.5 years ago, after 41 years in both settled and then interim ministry, I finally retired. So I am now retired happily. Um, and I was very excited when I retired to be able to do some traveling. So for the first year and a half of my retirement, I did just that. I traveled quite a bit. And now, with the pandemic, I've put a lot of those travel plans on hold. Um, and here we are battling another surge, so I'm not going anywhere right now. Um, so what I do nowadays is I occupy my time singing in a couple of choirs. There's a community choir, and then the Oakland Symphony Chorus, which is really demanding and wonderful to be able to sing in. And we sing using special masks. Actually, I
Oh
have
my,
one here in case you get to a place. I don't, when you
yeah.
get back into your building, this is called a resonance singer's mask.
Oh my gosh.
Has extra space. And
Mhm.
it's amazing. It's actually amazing what you can hear singing through that mask. And in both choirs, we've actually done concerts using those masks. And
Oh
we
my
we
God.
heard. So it's, yeah, people have become very innovative during this pandemic.
Mhm.
I'm also occupying my time by writing, mostly memoir pieces and poetry. And I participate in writing classes among retired UU ministers. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, something for me to look forward to.
Yes, yes. These are conducted by one of our ministers who's a novelist, Judith Campbell.
Oh,
So,
cool.
so that's been fun. And I preach occasionally in congregations. I've done some virtual preaching as well as some, well, last fall I did some in person preaching until, we got another surge.
Mhm.
So while I was in Tucson, I became a grandmother for the first time, which was pretty exciting. I remember lighting a candle about that. And since then, another grandchild was born. So I have two ages 11 and 9, and they live near Portland, Oregon. And visiting them was going to be in my plans, and I've done some of that, but not as much as I would like during this time. Um, I was thinking back and remembering how much I loved being in the Tucson area, the beautiful desert, which I never expected to be so beautiful, but it really was, and so full of life. And I especially remember the warm evenings. And on those evenings, I would drag out my big bulky telescope, which some of the congregation was acquainted with, and uh, and do observing, which is something I've always loved. Um, but I haven't done much even since in the Bay Area here where I live in the chilly hills of Berkeley because it's just cold and I'm wimpy about it. So, but in Tucson, it was such a pleasure. It was like short sleeve weather all night.
Uh-huh. Oh my God. Would you do that with congregants? You would actually do some
Yeah,
observing?
we had a couple of star parties. Yeah, and
Cool.
right, I think I did one that was an auction item, a star party up
Uh-huh.
on the hill. We turned out all the lights that used to come on automatically, and we got a great observing session out of that.
Oh
So,
my God. That
so
sounds like so much fun.
yeah, it is fun, and that's a hobby that I've done for years. Again, tapering off as I get older and creakier, and the telescope's hard to move and it's cold. But in Tucson, it was such a pleasure because it was so warm.
Mm.
So that's another thing. Now I occupy my time listening to a lot of online astronomy lectures and things like that, not
Mhm.
going outside and freezing.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
What else do you remember about your time in Tucson when you were with Mountain Vista?
well, one of the things I did, in preparation to be talking with you, I picked out the file that I keep files on each congregation. See, they come in handy.
Uh, is
Who
that
knew?
paper? Can you touch it?
Yeah, it's actual paper. I have things online too, but I just looked at the paper stuff, and it consists of sermons and reports that I made to the congregation and write-ups of different group activities that we did. All of these interim specialty kinds of things. But before I even opened this file, I just stopped to think what was, because I've done 11 different interim ministries. And I asked myself, what was unique? What's really stands out about my being in Tucson? And two different things came to mind. One was the terrible time of the shooting, mass shooting. And it's interesting, I just saw on PBS um, the memorial that has just been, I guess, finished about that terrible thing, where 6 people died and Gabby Giffords, Congresswoman, was shot, and couldn't really work again after that, and other people were wounded, and one of the members of the congregation was stuck in this mall where that happened and couldn't get out for several hours, I think. Uh, but it made an impact on everybody in the community and certainly on the congregation. And the next day was Sunday, so we all came like shell shocked to the service, and there was a lot of time for the expression of shock and sorrow, and a lot of tears and lots of sharing, which we needed. We really needed. I did have a sermon title that I had come up with before the shooting happened. Ironically, the sermon title was Civility and Graciousness. And I actually revised the sermon based on what had happened, but it was still relevant, given that awful experience of a mass shooting right there, blocks from where most of us were. Um, so that really stuck in my memory, and I'll always remember that. The other unique thing that I thought of was the experience of creating a prison ministry with the congregation. So I had received a letter from an inmate in the Eloy Correctional Facility, and he had started a small group of inmates, and he wrote asking about creating a relationship with a UU congregation, and we were the closest one. So after reading that letter, I decided, why not? This is an outreach. This is an expression of um, creative, ongoing love. And I asked people, would you like to join me in doing something with these inmates that are identifying as UU in that facility? And to my delight, over something between 20 and 25 people came forward and said, yes, we'd like to do this. And that many people got trained by the prison staff. And we began to visit with the inmates, and we'd do a little service with them, and they would do some of what they did in their small group with us present. They did a lot of deep sharing. It was very, very powerful. And we brought them hymnals that were donated by the congregation, and we brought them paints. One of them was an amazing, well, more than one of them were amazing artists. And we listened to their writing, and one of the members coached them in writing, who was also a writer himself. So it was a wonderful back and forth interaction. Even got written up a little, and this was after I left, I was called to interview with somebody on the staff of the UU World to write up something about this prison ministry. And I don't know exactly how long it lasted, but it was unique in my experience. I had never had the opportunity to do anything like this, and I was just gratified by the congregation's very positive response to it.
Mm-hmm.
So both of these events, as I was thinking about it, the mass shooting and the prison ministry, speak to the theme of today's service, which, as you have told me, is courageous love. Um, One of the core values you aspire to. And to my way of thinking, those two events were expressions of courageous love. It was an outpouring of love and support for the victims of the shooting, as well as love and support for one another in facing this kind of a tragedy. And the courageous love was very much evident in our work in the prison ministry. Going through, all the hurdles you go through to get inside a prison, all the thick walls and the gates and everything, and being accompanied in order to speak with inmates who were hungering for a UU connection. So to me, that's creative, courageous love in action. I also have to say I found that love very much alive in the congregation itself, in their relationships with one another. One of the smaller projects we worked on was revising the behavioral covenant statement among members to make it more concise, because it was rather wordy and user-friendly. And I was thrilled to go to your website and see that it's still up there, that you still use that very concise statement of how we want to be with one another, that kind of a covenant. And to me, that was an expression of love and concern for one another, and concern for how you communicate with one another. In one of the small groups, I asked the question about what do you all like about this congregation? And I want to quote from my own report. One person said, no, many people said, among the things you like about this congregation, you mentioned acceptance and an open atmosphere, friendliness, fellowship, love, warmth, diversity, joyful, nice, like-minded people, and feels like family. Those are the things that I wrote in the report that summed up what people said. And to me, that was an expression of creative, I keep saying creative, courageous love in action. So that was impressive to me, and working together on the behavioral covenant and getting it down to a few words that are very poignant, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. I just want to reflect back to you that I've been wondering too in my interim about the DNA of a congregation.
mhm,
And as you know, DNA can have lots of complicated aspects to it.
right.
But I feel like that's like a thread, and Reverend Susan pulled on that thread too, around that there's something about the DNA of this congregation that really loves to be intimate, loves
Yes.
to be, it's in their DNA to want to connect, to build relationships, to foster intimacy. And then with each generation, the skills to develop that even deeper, and the practice of developing that deeper. That is just really in the DNA of this congregation.
I think it really is, and it was very palpable as soon as I walked in the door. The welcoming I received and the support for the various projects I was bringing was amazing. Um,
Yeah.
People were eager to even go deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that is true, and it's not always true. So
No.
that's,
No,
that's something
no,
to be grateful for in the congregation.
it is. And as an interim too, I experienced something similar. There's just been really openness. I mean, everyone here has had to be open to change because we were in a pandemic together.
Hmm.
But it also, I felt like there was a lot of openness, receptivity, curiosity about new approaches, especially when it fostered the intimacy you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that was some of the joyfulness. What were the things that Mountain Vista were going through then?
Mhm.
What were some of the growing edges?
Well, the main things, the two most pressing issues that were present when I came to the congregation, um, and I arrived in the fall of 2010. So it was a time when the economy was tanking somewhat. But the two most pressing issues that are interrelated were building issues and finances. Very much what some of what you're going through now,
Yep.
but in a very different way now. Pledges were lagging in the congregation, and they had to pass a deficit budget for several years before I got there. Every year they passed a deficit budget. They drew down their meager reserve funds or endowment funds, um, and I saw that this, and they knew, of course, that this is unsustainable in the long run. So I remember speaking to the congregation about some of the reasons I saw for pledging being down, like the economy, and the fact that there were a lot of retired people who um, were on fixed incomes. And the other factor was the snowbird phenomenon that I had never come across anywhere else, where people would divide their pledge, what would be a nice, healthy one pledge to one congregation, but they divided it between two congregations. So each congregation got somewhat less, and that was a challenge because it was a fair percentage, 13% in one survey that I saw of the congregation. Um, so that was an issue, and there were reasons for pledges being lower, but I thought that this congregation could do a lot better. And a
Mhm.
lot of people agreed with me, a lot of the leadership agreed, um, that we needed to bring up the average pledge to be more in line with what the UUA was recommending and what other congregations were able to do. Not all of them, of course. But so we launched two pledge drives, two regular pledge drives, but we were ambitious in trying to get the pledge level up. I said at the time, I remember, that there felt like there was a culture of scarcity and a lot of anxiety around finances, and that needed to be acknowledged and addressed. So we mounted the pledge drives each year and worked really hard on getting the pledges up, and they did go up somewhat. And the congregation had finally a balanced budget. But there was a cost, and the cost was it was decided that it's more sustainable to go for a three-quarter time minister. So that was done, and a lot of people were disappointed that that had to be done. But it was done, and there were still, as I recall, three good candidates,
Mhm.
even at that level of salary. And then, of course, the congregation chose Ron Fairs, and he came understanding. He and I had talked about it. He came understanding that there was a culture of scarcity, and said that he wanted to work on that further. So,
Mhm.
but that was an ongoing. That's part of the DNA too, I think.
Mhm.
Anxiety around finances and the scarcity
Mhm.
mentality that you know it's a challenge, but it's something that can be dealt with, I think, over time.
And you've been a minister in a lot of different contexts. What do you think helps when folks are feeling scared about scarcity, especially around finances? What supports people in moving through that together?
I think there's kind of a group think that can happen when people begin to raise their pledges and talk about it,
Mhm.
and tell other people, I realized I could do without this, and I did it. I do without this other thing because this congregation is so valuable and so important to me that I want to support it to the best of my ability. And it catches on, and people
Mhm.
begin to see we don't have to think in terms of scarcity. We can think in terms of abundance. And we
Mhm.
may not ever get to, abundance in the sense we'd love, where we can just spend and spend, but just the fact that people acknowledge, we were thinking of, we have to cut this and we have to cut that. Why don't we think in a different way?
Mm.
And it takes a few to start that ball rolling, but then it can catch on and it can be very successful. We
Hmm.
did some of that, and we had a ways to go still by the time I left.
Well, it makes me just think that that happened. And then they also launched a huge capital campaign where there was a, I mean, talk about abundance
Yeah,
that
yeah.
just that moved right into actually we have enough even to give more. So that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So the other issue, of course, was the building, the building issue.
The building.
And at the time I was there, the congregation was still in the triple wide on the hill,
Mhm.
which was an amazing thing. But the congregation had a lot of hopes and dreams about building a new sanctuary in its place in that location, um, as well as building more RE space, which was sorely needed. This was another unique thing, being I've never ministered inside the walls of a mobile home before. Thinking about that, I remember someone saying, "We're the only religious organization that is certified by the DMV." Something. I mean, it really was a mobile home. Um, so anyway, the congregation had engaged architects years prior with big plans to build a whole new sanctuary and new buildings for RE on the property. It was a grand plan, but the funding just wasn't there to do that. So the plans were scaled down to make do but improve what was there. They were scaled down greatly, but then to add to that disappointment, even the modified plans were stalled. They couldn't do anything because of permit issues. It was a strange thing that they didn't have a proper certificate of occupancy for the building to begin with. They've discovered, and they had to struggle with uh, the governmental powers that be on that issue. So, given that, there was a stall in terms of any progress on the building, and I was just thrilled and delighted to see that you guys have, you know, gotten a new building and it's beautiful. And I watched the video and I was just so impressed, given what I remember about the building issues being, so difficult, almost insurmountable, it seemed. Now, I understand there are still financial challenges around the building regarding renovation costs and all, but I think this congregation is to be congratulated for finally having an aesthetic and functional home. And
Mhm.
I guess you haven't moved in yet, right? So,
You're multi-platform. Mm.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But it is quite impressive. That was an amazing accomplishment. Just amazing.
Mhm.
So, despite the serious challenges of building issues and finance, and they're very basic issues, um, I still discovered a congregation that was really very warm and welcoming.
Mhm.
I mean, when a congregation is going through lots of conflict, that takes center stage and even eclipses other issues. But here, the congregation was getting along, being warm and welcoming, getting new members in. But, so they didn't have to work on that front. And really, when you think of what a congregation is about, it's best to have that and then have to deal with some of the financial and building and other, practical issues than to have to change the whole mindset of a congregation where they're at each other's throats and not getting along too well. So it was very wonderful to walk into that kind of feeling in the congregation, and have the support that I got myself for all the the various. I threw on them a lot of extra meetings and events, all in pursuit of interim goals and developmental uh, issues. Um, I something I wanted to be sure and say about this aspect of courageous love in action. One member in one of the small groups I led, when I asked people to envision the congregation 10 years into the future, which is now, um, one person summed up the gratitude this person felt for the active leadership at the time by saying, 10 years from now, we will look back on the current leadership and thank them for getting us to this place.
Hmm.
And that just really struck me because it's that time now, 10 years from then, and look where you are. I mean, it's way ahead of where you were as a congregation um, when you were up on that hill, stuck, not being able to move forward with building plans. And there had to be financial work to get to where you are, as well as um, finding a building that was adequate. So it's quite thrilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any, kind of last words for Mountain Vista as they're about to call another minister and hopefully begin, in a new pandemic, endemic world, learn how to both be in their building and also be outside of their building? What's the wisdom? What's the
Well, I was thinking about the wisdom that I think is something that all congregations should really try to acquire as they go through. I shouldn't say it that way. As they have ministers, successive ministers, the wisdom that accumulates with understanding that ministers are people and that they have their limitations. So, in my career, I've had a couple of long-term settled ministries, and what made them sustainable for me over time, wanting to stay in those congregations and serve them, was the kind of support that is necessary and the kind of understanding that a minister needs time off. Minister needs people to not expect him or her to be all things to all people at all times. That those expectations are realistic. Um, so I thought I might quote myself from a sermon I dug up.
do it, Joy? I love quoting myself. Go for it.
This was a sermon I dug up when the congregation had already called Ron Fairs as the next minister, and I was sort of giving some advice about what to do to support the next ministry and make it a substantial one, and last for a period of time. I started out here in this little section by quoting the Reverend David Rankin, retired UU minister, who posed the question, "What is the peculiar problem of the ministry?" And he answered, "It is a question, I believe, of expectation. If the field is littered with dead and wounded clergy, with the bricks of divided churches, and with the moaning of angry and disillusioned parishioners, it's because the expectations go beyond all possibility of being satisfied."
Mm.
He powerfully stated that, the expectations of a minister. So what I said is, I would like to offer you some advice as you begin your relationship with your next minister. And I use he because it was going to be Reverend Ron Fairs. I said, remember and try to keep in check the unrealistic expectations that people place on ministers. Ministers are human and have both gifts and limitations, as anyone does. Remember that although your minister can't and won't expect to be supported by you in the same way that he strives to support you, individually and collectively, his ministry will thrive with your support for his efforts and the projects he undertakes. Be mindful that he can't be a friend to you in quite the same way as you can be friends with each other. Remember the sense of personal isolation in this unique profession and assure him the space and time he needs to connect with his ministerial colleagues. For ministers, this professional connection is a lifeline. Other ministers doing the same work understand what it's like as no one else can. Likewise, bear in mind that your new minister will need definite and complete time off regularly to recharge his battery and to be with and cultivate his personal relationships with his friends and family, which are another lifeline. Also, allow his family, his spouse, and children, in Ron's case, to find their own place within the congregation. So I remember when I first went to my first longer term settled ministry. This was in 1970. I don't know, 7. Uh, People were worried because I brought a husband, and they didn't know if the husband was willing to do the Thanksgiving dinner. So that kind of thing. They were worried about that when they had their meeting on whether to call me or not. That
1970, huh?
70, 77, yeah. So I mean, was it, yeah, 77. So that is, those kinds of expectations, those more traditional ones, have somewhat fallen away, but there still are expectations upon a minister that are unrealistic and need to be examined and need to be kept in mind. And the minister's time needs to be protected too. So I would say people doing that for me helped me stay longer in the ministries that I had when I was a settled minister. So, just to end, if this is okay, just again, a little bit from that sermon I gave back then. Um, I wrote, I believe it is a minister's job and unique challenge to celebrate life, to say yes to existence. And that, I would say, is the core of what we ministers try to do, to say yes to life in all its facets, even in the face of struggle and hardship, to revere and celebrate the sacred, even in the most ordinary of things, to provide guidance spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually as people try to glimpse the eternal behind the flux of time, to help people experience what is holy and precious in the midst of their everyday lives, to say yes to the world by striving to heal its brokenness. In all these ways and many more, we ministers try to help bring people along with us into that pleasant country that exclaims a resounding yes to life. And then I ended with, of all people, E. E. Cummings, who's a hard poet to actually read, but this little piece from him where he says, "Yes is a pleasant country, if's wintry. My lovely, let's open the year. Both is the very weather, not either, my treasure, when violets appear. Love is a deeper season than reason, my sweet one, and April's where we're."
Oh, Joy, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks for coming back. I really appreciate it. It's good to hear you and hear the past and the present and the present and the past and your wisdom. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It was a delight.